Justices at the Constitutional Court are deliberating on the political fate of President Yoon Suk Yeol after both his defense team and the parliamentary impeachment panel shared their closing statements on February 25th. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective. It's Thursday, March 6th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. The Constitutional Court has yet to disclose the date of its verdict announcement on the impeachment trial of President Yoon Suk Yeol, but many pundits here believe the announcement may take place late next week. For more on this, I have freelance journalist Raphael Rashid in the studio. Raphael, it's good to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Hwang Joung-wook, the head of LawQuant LLC, with the pundits' take on today's topic. Mr. Hwang, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Having me.
Right, we'll start here in the studio. Raphael, let's begin then with some details about the gist of the current foreign media coverage of President Yoon Suk Yeol's political fate as we await the Constitutional Court's verdict.
Yeah, foreign media coverage of Yoon's impeachment trial has focused on several key aspects. Many international outlets are framing this as a critical moment for South Korean democracy, with many highlighting the unprecedented nature of these events. Many of the outlets have described the scenes outside the Constitutional Court as being tense, with thousands of police being deployed and pro-Yoon supporters gathering outside during the final hearing, but also over the past few days. Even today, I was there outside today, plenty of people, plenty of action. There's, I think, particular attention on Yoon's defense strategy. In his last days of the hearing, he's constantly maintained that his martial law declaration was necessary to alert the public about what he called anti-state forces and external threats. And many news wires as well have reported that Yoon blamed the opposition parties for the political crisis, accusing them of obstructing his agenda and impeaching numerous government officials. There's also been a lot of focus these days on the polarized nature of South Korean society. Many publications talking about the mass rallies supporting and opposing Yoon. There's been a focus on the potential outcomes of what will happen in the coming days if the court upholds the impeachment, and if they do decide to do so, then there would be a snap election within 60 days. So I think there's been a lot of focus on the overall dynamics of the entire situation, and of course maybe even the broader implications on the world stage, relations with North Korea, China, the US, especially given the new Trump administration as well. So I think those have been the key themes that have been talked about in foreign media.
Right then, Mr. Hwang, as I mentioned at the start, quite a number of pundits are talking about a potential verdict by the Constitutional Court late next week, perhaps next Friday. Do you share this outlook, Mr. Hwang?
It makes sense. I think one big variable is the fact that Constitutional Court is very concerned about appearance of impartiality and the fact that they're giving due consideration for all the issues involved. And given the fact that Korean society has become really polarized, perhaps not 50-50, I guess I'll estimate maybe somewhere along the lines of 70-30 or maybe 80-20. The polls these days, for a variety of reasons, are not very accurate, so it's hard for me to get a precise measure of kind of the split, but the society is polarized over this issue. And as we saw with the attack on the Seoul District, Western District Court, things have gotten kind of violent. So I think, of course, the court knows this. So I think court is going to take a very deliberate action to make it appear as if they are really impartial and they're giving a full consideration. So it's possible that they push the date back maybe the following week. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to say without any kind of insider knowledge.
Right, for sure. Mr. Hwang, political conflict continues over the fate of Justice nominee Ma Eun-hyuk, with the opposition lawmakers calling on acting President Choi Sang-mok to appoint the Ma, while acting President Choi appears to be holding his ground. Do you suppose this particular conflict could serve as a variable of sorts to the Constitutional Court's proceedings on President Yoon Suk Yeol's fate?
Not really. At this point, even if acting President Choi Sang-mok appoints Ma to the Constitutional Court, I think it's just way too late for him to join in and catch up with the facts, the records, and join in the deliberation. If that happens, that might actually just delay things more. So I think the 8 justices will just go ahead, whether or not what happens to the nominee Ma. What is interesting is that acting President Choi Sang-mok is actually acting this way, even though we've had the same Constitutional Court, as is constituted with 8 justices, have decided 8-0, 8-0, that Choi should appoint Ma. And basically, Choi is saying that, well, I'll take that under advisement, but has not acted so. So it is kind of interesting why he's acting this way. So, well, there we go. But it is a puzzle, but at the same time, I don't think it will have a material impact on the way the impeachment trial will be deliberated.
Right. Meanwhile, Mr. Hwang, what's the latest with regard to the impeachment trial of Prime Minister Han Duck-soo? And does his case look to affect the legal proceedings of the case against President Yoon Suk Yeol?
I'll be really surprised if the Constitutional Court reaches any kind of decision about Prime Minister Han's case before President Yoon's case, because obviously the priority-wise, we need a decision on the President Yoon's fate first and foremost. So, I mean, I think that is exactly how the Constitutional Court is proceeding. So my expectation is that what happens to Prime Minister Han will be a kind of a moot point, because we will have to, after whatever decision is made on President Yoon's case.
Right then, back here in the studio, Raphael, the big question now is, will the Constitutional Court rule to remove the president or to reinstate him back into the top office? And of course, there is rampant speculation about the president's political fate. What appears to be the prospects shared or the outlook shared by the foreign media?
Yeah, I've seen many articles in foreign media that are leaning towards or hinting towards predicting that the Constitutional Court will vote to uphold Yoon's impeachment, often citing legal experts who suggest that there's a high probability that the court will remove him from office. For instance, in the South China Morning Post, there are quotes saying that, you know, it's highly likely that Yoon would not prevail, and cites ample evidence that his actions violated the Constitution. Some articles are talking that maybe there might even be a unanimous decision at the court. Of course, we'll see on the day. I think what's particularly noteworthy is that these predictions aren't just coming from progressive voices, but we're also seeing maybe more conservative voices that are also raising the issue. Even within the People Power Party, we've had former lawmaker Choi Jae-hyung, who has been quoted as saying that Yoon's impeachment appears inevitable because deploying military forces to the National Assembly would constitute a serious and clear violation of the Constitution and the law. Many foreign observers point to these issues, and I think indirectly hinting that there's genuine concerns, and I think that these are the points that the Constitutional Court will have to really look into. Was there really a genuine emergency when there was no war or armed conflict? Did he really violate the procedures when it came to not properly notifying the National Assembly? Sending the forces to the National Assembly is a very visual thing that many people cannot forget. And, you know, I think the media are highlighting these issues, potentially predicting what the Constitutional Court will rule. That said, I think that the media does recognize that South Korean politics remains highly volatile and unpredictable, and some outlets are pointing to the intense pressure that the justices will be under. especially given that even there's a lot of the supporters outside the court right now, some of them are harassing, if not stalking them outside their houses. I think the court will, of course, have to think about what will happen were he to be reinstated as well. But overall, I think most outlets are careful to acknowledge the volatility of the situation and also the deeply polarized landscape of politics in general.
Right. And pundits also, Raphael, claim that regardless of the outcome of this impeachment trial, the political gap within the public here will only go deeper. Is this a thought that you yourself share based on your observations on the ground?
I hate to say it, but I'm afraid I do believe that the political polarization that we're seeing right now is likely to persist, if not intensify, whether or not he is removed from office or regardless of the Constitutional Court ruling. I think what we're witnessing these days is, isn't just a disagreement about President Yoon's actions, but a fundamental divide in how different segments of society view or perceive reality. We've seen, as you mentioned, the rallies over the past weekend were striking, not just for their size, but also they reflect how these two different sides have completely separate worldviews, in my opinion. And many people within Yoon's Conservative People Power Party genuinely believe that last April's parliamentary elections were fraudulent, and these claims continue despite no major election observer, be it internally, internationally, or any courts raising any concerns about the vote. It's interesting because I personally visited the National Election Commission recently to try and see and understand how the counting process works and whatnot. And the conclusion that I came up with was that the voting is such it's such a public spectacle in front of hundreds, if not thousands, of eyes and cameras, and a lot of the footage online that claims that there was some kind of election fraud actually has a very easy and simple answer to it. And what we see online does not reflect what actually happened, and people just interpret or misinterpret what was really happening. Meanwhile, we've seen plenty of reports online about couples breaking up, families feuding, friendships ending over political disagreements, and I'm hearing a lot of that from my younger Korean friends who have a lot of fights with their parents these days. So I do think that the political polarization is here to stay, and regardless of whether they remove him, it's definitely going to probably get worse, and I think this is probably going to be one of the biggest homeworks for the two political parties, is to stop or to lessen this kind of animosity that we're seeing on both sides.
You're right. And staying with this, Mr. Hwang, this is an impromptu question. Based on your observations with regards to political divide currently taking place here in South Korea, what do you suppose are some of the potential reasons behind this great divide?
As Raphael just pointed out, I think there's a growing divide on how one perceives reality. So for those who believe that the elections were fraudulent and that President Yoon was justified in declaring emergency martial law, if I sort of, resuscitate what they say, at least in public, is that South Korea is about to topple over. Both North Korea and China have tons of spies everywhere. Prosecutors, the army, the police, the opposition party, and even someone like me are all North Korean or Chinese spies. And we're just hanging on by just by the skin of our teeth before toppling over and be sold over to China. And therefore, they seem like they're on a mission to save South Korea from this precipice. Now, for someone like me, and I'll say that I believe that I'm sort of, hold a common sense view of what is happening in South Korean society and just walking around South Korea on a daily basis, there's a zero basis for that. I mean, China does not have that kind of, control over South Korea. And it's just that it's crazy that things that I believe that these people believe. I mean, for example, there was a widely reported, far right-wing newspaper that reported that somehow 99 Chinese spies were caught at the National Election Office, and somehow the American CIA were holding on to them, and it's completely false. The American forces based in South Korea have, publicly announced that is just a false news. It's not correct, but there's nothing dissuading these supporters from believing that kind of stuff. So once we have very different perception of reality, of course, both sides will be acting very differently, and we will be each looking at each other as if, what planet are you living on? I think that is kind of the reality we're facing here in South Korea today.
Mr. Hwang, some have also taken it upon themselves to draw parallels between the impeachment trial of President Yoon Suk Yeol and that of former President Park Geun-hye. What are some of your takeaways?
I mean, President Park Geun-hye, I think the big difference from President Yoon Suk Yeol, didn't try to rally her supporters to do something violent. I think President Yoon Suk Yeol, although he didn't say explicitly, but by all the words that he said, implications of things that he has done, it's sort of, we're really counting on his core rabid supporters to rise up, because maybe by instinct or by rational thought, that he knows that he has a very poor legal case, both factually and based on law. So the only chance for redemption for him is basically there is some kind of big change in the political scenery in Korea, so that there's overwhelming support for him, so that he can return to power, or at least avoid jail time, as well as for his wife. And that has been sort of, if you look at it from that perspective, a lot of his actions do make sense. Otherwise, kind of the legal arguments that he himself presented, that his lawyers have presented before Constitutional Court, were of such poor quality that you sort of have to scratch your head and thinking, well, these are supposed to be really experienced lawyers. Why are they making these arguments? But if you look at it from the political perspective that I just outlined, it starts to sort of make sense.
Right, then keeping in mind what Mr. Hwang has just said, Raphael, this is also an impromptu question. Earlier we talked about the big political divide here in South Korea. Do you suppose that politicians perhaps then could do their part by coming together, by trying to bridge the gap between their differences, and that would be the step in the right direction?
I think you've answered the question. I think it's extremely important for the two sides to come together and to try and find some middle grounds. It's clear whether or not we agree with Yoon, who declared martial law because of this impasse in Parliament, and the opposition parties constantly basically breaking down all, anything that goes through. In a way, he does have a point in that there needs to be something to be done to resolve this animosity and impasse on both sides. And it's unfortunate that even these days, in the build-up to the verdict at the Constitutional Court, we're still seeing the fighting on both sides. We're still seeing, and to be honest, when we see the People Power Party completely siding with the president, I just find it very, very disturbing, because I think you can be conservative and also be against the martial law and realize that something terribly wrong happened that night. And I've only seen a handful of conservative pundits and conservative heavyweights who have condemned President Yoon and the martial law for what had happened. And I find it very disturbing that not so many People Power Party lawmakers see it that way, and I think that they're trying to cling on to for their own political survival, probably in the future, for future elections or future positions. I don't think the martial law situation is a political situation. I don't think you need to be conservative or liberal to have a view on this, but unfortunately, even the people in power at the moment are like making this a very political affair, and even heading to these pro-Yoon protests that are full of conspiracies And I think it's not a very responsible thing to do to go to these places that are full of fake news and conspiracies and to not condemn them. I think you can be conservative and also know what's right and wrong in this country.
Right. Moving forward, Raphael, the British weekly The Economist, it recently published its Global Democracy Index, South Korea. It took quite a bit of a tumble. Could you tell us a bit more about those findings and the broader implications, of course, for South Korea?
Yeah, so the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index for 2024 saw the country fall 10 places from 22nd to 32nd place out of 167 countries, with its score dropping from 8.09 to 7.75. Might look like a small drop, but it's particularly significant because it means that South Korea no longer classifies as a so-called full democracy, but now has been degraded to a so-called flawed democracy, a status it managed to rise above since 2020. And I think what's concerning is that this represents South Korea's lowest score in a very long time. And the Economist Intelligence Unit specifically mentions that this downgrade is directly attributed to President Yoon's martial law declaration and the subsequent political turmoil and instability. Interestingly, the democratic regression was already flagged last year even by another institution, the VDEM Institute at Sweden's University of Gothenburg, similarly downgraded South Korea's ranking in their own democracy report 2024. Basically, they classified South Korea as a case of autocratization alongside Indonesia and Myanmar, citing Yoon's administration's measures against previous administration, attacks on gender equality, undermining of media freedom. So we've seen these kind of trends before. I don't think that comes out of the blue, regardless of the martial law. But I think the implications are serious, quite serious actually, because for decades South Korea has been building its image as a vibrant democracy in the Asian region, and one of the more successful case studies in the region that transitioned from a military dictatorship into a vibrant democracy. And so this regression, I think, raises questions about the durability of democratic institutions in a region that has struggled with democracies to take proper root. Internationally, I think it damages South Korea's soft power and moral standing at a time when, as I said, the country has been trying to position itself as a middle power, championing liberal democratic values. And I think this is even more challenging given the geopolitical situations and rising tensions in the region. So I think these numbers and surveys that show democratic foundations of South Korea may be more fragile than previously thought. And while the National Assembly's swift action to overturn the martial law, and we saw, of course, the resilience of protesters in the streets, I think the fact that a democratically elected president attempted such a move does, of course, raise serious concerns about South Korean democracy going forward, but hopefully in a positive direction.
Right. And against this backdrop, Mr. Hwang, there is growing fear about another potential outburst of violence after the Constitutional Court announces its verdict. What are your thoughts? And Mr. Hwang, are we prepared to promptly deal with such aggression? And how do we find our path forward after the verdict?
That would be proverbial $64,000 question. For example, there was a bit of a big political scandal in a way because current PPP lawmaker, People Power Party, the ruling party lawmaker named Seo Chun-ho, he showed up one of these far right-wing rallies and literally said that if President Yoon is removed, people need to rise up and smash the Constitutional Court, National Election Office, as well as the Corruption Investigation Office. He literally said that. in public. I cannot imagine more direct challenge to the rule of law and public order than, fighting words like that. And literally, the current lawmaker who sits as one of the 300 lawmakers in the National Assembly on the ruling party is willing to actually say that to hundreds and thousands of people who were gathered in such rallies is just shocking to me. I mean, the sheer political crassness and recklessness that was displayed there was really shocking. But at the same time, he obviously thought that it made sense for him to say that politically. It advances his political career. So I think we do need to step back and think about the fact that whatever the system we have in place in Korea kind of encourages that behavior. What I mean is that like each political party, and this actually applies to both Democratic Party as well as PPP, you have the incentive to appeal to the core Rabi supporters first. So in PPP's case, right now, your own, the Korean term for this is jiptokgi or house rabbits, meaning that your reliable core supporters are these far right-wingers who believe in these crazy conspiracy theories. So lawmakers are willing to say these crazy stuff in public. If you recall from just a couple of years ago, Lee Jae-myung on the Democratic Party was accused of, kind of riling up his own Rabi supporters known as Ketdal or Keagetdal들, or the Daughters for Reform, and he was actually, accused of behaving the exact same way in a different context, of course. If we have a political system that, awards this kind of behavior, of course, the polarization that we've talked about before is going to get worse. The politicians, in order to be, nominated within their own party, has every incentive to be as polarized as possible. And so I think as a nation, we do need to think seriously about, reforming the system so that such behavior is not rewarded.
Right, for sure, Mr. Hwang. That's a very important point, of course. Right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Mr. Hwang, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. And Raphael here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, on that note, we'll end Thursday's edition of Press Perspective. We'll return same time tomorrow with a look at the gender gap between the men and women here in the country as well as across the world. Thank you for watching.